The night sky erupted in a brilliant flash of purple and gold as Princess Vendra's escape pod pierced Earth's atmosphere. Warning signals blared through the cramped cabin as the vessel's stabilizers failed, sending her spiraling toward the ground below. Her royal guard had insisted she take the last emergency transport when the rebels stormed the palace, but they never had time to properly program the navigation systems. Gripping the controls with her iridescent hands, Vendra fought to maintain consciousness as the pod's artificial gravity flickered. The pendant at her throat pulsed with energy, the sacred crystal that marked her as heir to the Australian throne. If the rebels got their hands on it, they could access the ancient technologies that had kept peace in their star system for millennia. The ground rushed up to meet her as the pod's remaining systems went dark. Vendra closed her eyes and braced for impact, whispering a prayer to the cosmic forces her people had long worshipped. The crash came with a deafening roar and a shower of sparks as the pod carved a deep trench through an empty field. When the dust settled, Vendra assessed her situation through the cracked viewport. She had landed in what appeared to be a primitive agricultural area, far from any signs of civilization. The pod's emergency beacon was damaged, meaning no rescue would be coming from what remained of her loyal forces. She would have to survive on this backward planet until she could find a way to contact her allies. A sharp pain in her side made her wince as she activated the pod's atmospheric analysis. The air was breathable, though the higher nitrogen content would take some getting used to. At least her natural ability to adapt to different environments, a trait of her species, would help her blend in. Her silvery skin began shifting to a more Earth-normal tone even as she watched. Distant lights caught her attention, some kind of ground vehicle approaching the crash site. Vendra quickly gathered what she could salvage from the pod, her royal insignia, a universal translator, and a small energy weapon for protection. She couldn't let the pod's technology fall into the wrong hands, so she initiated the emergency purge sequence. The vessel would dissolve into harmless base elements within hours. The approaching vehicle turned out to be what the locals called a pickup truck, driven by a human male who appeared to be in his early 30s. He stepped out cautiously, holding up some kind of primitive light source. Vendra's translator quickly processed his words as he called out, "Hello? Is anyone hurt? I saw something come down." She considered running but realized she needed help if she was going to survive here. The human appeared non-threatening, and her quick scan showed no weapons or communication devices that could alert authorities. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the beam of his flashlight. I could use some assistance," she said, the translator allowing her to speak in his language. She winced again at the pain in her side. The human, who introduced himself as Nathan Parker, seemed surprisingly calm for someone encountering an obvious alien crash survivor. As he helped her into his truck, he explained that he was a professor of astronomy at the local university and had always believed in the possibility of extraterrestrial life. The irony almost made her laugh despite her situation. "I have a guest house behind my main residence," he said as they drove through the darkness. "You can stay there while you recover. I won't tell anyone about you. I know how the government would react, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone." Vendra studied him carefully. Her people's ability to sense deception detected no lies in his words, only genuine concern and fascination. Still, she knew she would have to be careful about how much she revealed. The less he knew about her true identity, the safer they both would be. The guest house turned out to be a small but comfortable dwelling that would serve her needs. Nathan brought her medical supplies and clean clothes, though she had to adjust them to fit her slightly taller frame. He seemed to be fighting back 1,000 questions as he showed her how to use various Earth devices, the bathroom, the microwave, the television. "Thank you," she said as he prepared to leave her to rest. "I know taking in a stranger, especially one like me, is a risk." He smiled, and something about the warmth in his expression made her royal composure falter slightly. "Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most amazing discoveries," he replied. "Get some sleep. We can figure out our next steps in the morning." Alone in the guest house, Vendra sank onto the soft bed and let exhaustion wash over her. Her hand clutched the royal pendant as tears finally came. Her world had shattered in a single day, her parents possibly dead or imprisoned, her people under the control of traitors, and herself stranded on a planet that barely understood space travel existed. But as she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts weren't of her lost throne or the rebellion that had driven her here. Instead, she found herself thinking of kind eyes and a gentle smile, and wondering if perhaps the cosmic forces had guided her to this exact spot for a reason. The pendant's soft glow illuminated the darkness as Vendra slipped into uneasy dreams, its ancient power a reminder of who she was and all she had left behind. Somewhere above, beyond Earth's atmosphere, she knew the rebels would be expanding their search. She only hoped she could find a way home before they found her, and before her growing curiosity about this human professor complicated things even further. 2 weeks on Earth had taught Princess Vendra more about adaptation than a lifetime in the royal palace. She stood before the mirror in Nathan's guest house, practicing what he called a natural walking pace. Her usually graceful, floating movements had drawn too much attention during their first trip to the grocery store. Now she deliberately added weight to each step, trying to mimic the casual human gait. The wounds from her crash landing had healed, leaving her with no excuse to remain hidden away. Nathan had suggested she pose as a visiting researcher at his university's observatory, which would explain both her presence and her intense interest in the stars. He'd even created a convincing set of credentials under the name Dr. Vendra Stellaris, a small joke that made her smile every time she heard it. Ready for your first night at work? Nathan knocked on the door frame, holding up a lab coat that would complete her disguise. His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, something that had been happening more frequently lately. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, taking the coat. Her fingers brushed his, sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. The physical reactions this human triggered in her were unsettling. On Australia, marriages were strategic alliances, not matters of the heart. These emerging feelings had no place in her plans to reclaim her throne. The observatory sat on a hill outside town, its massive dome silhouetted against the sunset. Nathan's graduate students were already there, calibrating equipment for the night's observations. Vendra felt a pang of homesickness as she looked at the familiar constellations through such primitive instruments. From this angle, she could just barely make out the star cluster that contained her home world. Dr. Stellaris will be working with us on the gravitational anomaly project, Nathan explained to his team. Her expertise in quantum field theory will be invaluable. He had coached her well, she knew enough about Earth's current understanding of physics to maintain her cover while introducing subtle insights from her advanced knowledge. As the night progressed, Vendra found herself genuinely enjoying the work. There was something pure about humanity's drive to understand the cosmos, even with their limited technology. She helped one student correct a calculation, carefully ensuring her explanation stayed within Earth's known scientific boundaries. You're a natural teacher, Nathan said later, when they were alone in the main observatory. He was updating star charts while she monitored a particularly interesting stellar phenomenon. The students already adore you. I was trained from birth to guide others, she replied softly. Though I never expected to be teaching humans about their own universe. Nathan turned to face her, his expression serious. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. That pendant you always wear, I've noticed it seems to react to certain energy frequencies we detect through the telescope. It's not just jewelry, is it? Vendra's hand instinctively went to the royal crystal. She had tried to keep its glow hidden, but of course an astronomer would notice such details. No, she admitted. It's complicated. Before she could decide how much to reveal, a warning light flashed on her concealed wrist device. Her heart stopped as she recognized the energy signature. An Australian scout ship had entered Earth's atmosphere. They were searching for her. Nathan, I need to show you something. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. If the rebels were here, he deserved to know the danger he was in. She held up the pendant, letting its crystal catch the starlight. I haven't been entirely honest about who I am. The crystal's glow intensified, projecting a holographic map of the Australian Empire. Nathan's eyes widened as he recognized star systems humans hadn't even discovered yet. I am not simply a refugee, Vendra continued. I am the Crown Princess of Australia, keeper of the sacred technologies that have maintained peace in our sector for generations. And the people who drove me from my home have followed me here. She expected him to back away, to be angry at her deception. Instead, he stepped closer, studying the hologram with a scientist's curiosity in something else, concern, not for the advanced technology, but for her. What do they want? This crystal is genetically linked to my bloodline. Only I can access its full power. They need me to control the ancient defense systems that protect our worlds. She deactivated the hologram as another alert warned her the scout ship was getting closer. I should leave. I've put you in enough danger already. No. Nathan's hand caught hers as she turned to go. You don't have to face this alone. The observatory has equipment we can modify to track their ships, maybe even scramble their sensors. Let me help you. The warmth of his touch seemed to flow through her entire body, making the crystal pulse in response. Touch telepathy was rare among her people, but in that moment, she felt a flash of his emotions, determination, protectiveness, and something deeper that made her own heart race. It's too risky, she protested weakly, even as she knew she didn't want to leave. If they find out you're helping me. Sometimes the biggest risks. He began with a smile. Lead to the most amazing discoveries, she finished, remembering his words from the night they met. A distant rumble made them both look up through the observatory's dome. Something that might have looked like a meteor to human eyes streaked across the sky, but Vendra recognized the distinctive engine signature of an Australian vessel. We should get back to the house, Nathan said, already gathering equipment they might need. We can set up monitoring systems there. I'll tell the students we're tracking a unique astronomical event, it's not even really a lie. As they drove back through the darkness, Vendra found herself stealing glances at his profile. She had lost everything when she fled Australia, but somehow, she felt like she might have found something even more precious here on this primitive planet. The only question was, how long could she keep it? The crystal hummed against her chest, its ancient power responding to her turbulent emotions. Above them, hidden in the night sky, her pursuers continued their search pattern. The peace she had found in her simple disguise was shattered, but as Nathan's hand found hers again in the darkness, she realized she wasn't ready to let go of this new life, or him, just yet. The modified radio telescope picked up the signal at 3:47 a.m., a burst of encrypted Australian communications that made Vendra bolt upright from where she'd fallen asleep at Nathan's kitchen table. They had been tracking rebel movements for 3 days straight, converting his basement into an improvised command center filled with jury-rigged equipment that combined Earth technology with components salvaged from her escape pod. They're deploying ground teams, she translated, her fingers flying over the holographic interface projected by her pendant. 3 units, each with 4 soldiers. They're spreading out to search the area around the crash site. Nathan looked up from the array of monitors he'd assembled, his face pale in the blue glow of the screens. Dark circles under his eyes testified to sleepless nights spent helping her prepare for this moment. How long do we have? Hours at most. Their energy scanners will detect my signature eventually, even with the shielding we've set up. Vendra's voice remained steady, though her heart raced. She had grown too comfortable here, letting herself believe she could hide forever among the stars she once ruled. The past week had changed everything. Working side by side with Nathan, teaching him about her world while he showed her his, had awakened feelings she could no longer deny. Last night, watching the sunset from the observatory roof, he had almost kissed her. The memory of his face drawing closer, the way her crystal had pulsed with anticipation, still made her skin tingle. We need to get you somewhere safe, Nathan said, already gathering essential equipment. I have a colleague with a research facility in the mountains. No electronic signatures for miles. The house's lights flickered and died. Through the basement window, Vendra saw other homes going dark across the neighborhood. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the pattern. They're using an electromagnetic pulse. They're already here. Heavy footsteps creaked on the porch above. Nathan reached for her hand in the darkness, squeezing it once before letting go. They had planned for this, spent hours preparing escape routes and contingencies. But now that the moment had come, leaving him felt impossible. The tunnel, he whispered, referring to the old storm drain they had discovered connected his basement to the university's underground maintenance system. I'll hold them off. No. Vendra's crystal flared to life, illuminating the basement in a fierce purple glow. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. There's something I haven't told you about my powers. The front door burst open upstairs. Vendra pulled Nathan close, pressing her pendant against his chest. In the instant before the rebels reached the basement, she initiated a biological sync, a forbidden technique used only in the most desperate circumstances. The crystal's energy flowed into him, temporarily grafting Australian abilities onto his human DNA. Nathan gasped as his skin took on a subtle iridescence. What did you? Now you can fight with me, she said, just as the basement door splintered inward. The rebel soldiers were imposing in their battle armor, energy weapons charged and ready. Their leader's eyes locked onto Vendra's pendant. Your Highness, he said, voice dripping with false respect. The Prime Minister sends his regards. Thrain, she spat the name like poison. My father's trusted advisor, who orchestrated this coup. Tell me, did he promise you a piece of the Empire for hunting me down? The Empire is changing, Princess. The old ways, the restrictions on using our sacred technology, they're holding us back. The Prime Minister understands this. Come quietly, and you can be part of the new order. Nathan stepped forward, his newly enhanced body glowing with borrowed power. She's not going anywhere. The soldier's laugh cut short as Nathan moved with impossible speed, crossing the room in a blur to disarm the nearest rebel. Vendra seized the moment to activate her crystal's defensive capabilities, throwing up an energy shield as plasma bolts filled the air. What followed was chaos. Nathan's astronomical knowledge combined with his temporary Australian abilities made him a devastating fighter, anticipating enemy positions like plotting stellar movements. Vendra wove between soldiers with royal combat training, her crystal's power amplified by the surge of emotions she felt watching Nathan risk everything for her. But they were still outnumbered. A lucky shot clipped Nathan's shoulder, spinning him into a bank of monitors. Vendra felt the impact through their temporary bond and screamed in rage. The crystal responded to her emotions, releasing a pulse of energy that threw the remaining soldiers back. Nathan! She ran to him, hands glowing as she assessed the damage. The wound was superficial, his borrowed Australian physiology was already healing it. His eyes met hers with a mix of wonder and something deeper that made her crystal sing. I'm okay, he said, touching her face with shaking fingers. But that was incredible. I never imagined. A slow clap echoed from the basement doorway. A tall figure in ornate armor descended the stairs, flanked by more soldiers. Vendra's heart sank as she recognized Prime Minister Thrain himself. Touching, he said, gesturing at their embrace. The lost princess, finding love on a primitive world. But playtime is over, Your Highness. Your people need you. The ancient defense grid is destabilizing without a royal presence to maintain it. Whole systems could be lost. You're lying, Vendra said, but doubt crept into her voice. Could her absence truly threaten her people's safety? Am I? Check your pendant's long-range sensors. See for yourself what's happening in the Centauri colonies. With trembling hands, Vendra activated the stellar scan. Her face went ashen as she saw the readings. No. You have 1 hour to decide, princess. Return with us willingly to stabilize the grid, or watch your empire crumble, and this charming little planet suffer the consequences when the defense grid's collapse creates a cascade of wormhole anomalies across this sector. Thrain turned to leave, his point made. 1 hour. Choose wisely. In the aftermath of his departure, Vendra sank to her knees. Nathan held her close, his borrowed powers already starting to fade. "What are you going to do?" he whispered. She looked up at the man who had changed her understanding of love and duty, tears streaming down her face. "What I have to. The question is, will you help me save both our worlds?" The crystal pulsed between them, waiting for an answer that would change everything. The Royal Archives of Australia filled Nathan's basement in shimmering holographic displays, projected from Vendra's crystal. Ancient text and diagrams floated in the air as she searched frantically through millennia of technological history, looking for answers before Thrain's deadline expired. "There," Nathan said, pointing to a section of code that pulsed with familiar energy patterns. "The defense grid's base programming. It's not just powered by royal blood, it's actually reading your genetic signature as a kind of living key." Vendra nodded grimly. Which means Thrain wasn't lying about the grid's instability. But he's hiding something. Her fingers traced lines of ancient script that only those of royal blood could read. The system was designed to function for months without royal presence. My ancestors built in safeguards for exactly this type of situation. So the current instability isn't natural. Nathan's scientific mind quickly grasped the implications. They're deliberately destabilizing the grid to force your return. The revelation hit Vendra like a physical blow. She had suspected Thrain's treachery ran deep, but this. They're willing to risk millions of lives across multiple star systems just to capture me. But why? The royal blood's connection to the grid is about maintenance, not control. Even with me in their custody, they couldn't. She stopped, a terrible thought forming. The crystal at her throat grew cold as ancient memories stored within it resonated with her fear. Unless they found something in the forbidden archives. Something even my father never told me about. Working together, they dug deeper into the historical records. Nathan's outsider perspective proved invaluable, spotting patterns in the data that generations of Australian scholars had overlooked. As the pieces came together, Vendra felt her world tilt on its axis once again. "The defense grid isn't just a planetary shield network," she whispered. "It's a weapon. The most powerful weapon ever created. My ancestors built it to end a war that nearly destroyed our galaxy, then deliberately obscured its true nature so it could never be used that way again. But they couldn't completely deactivate it," Nathan finished. "So they bound it to their bloodline, ensuring only those taught the values of peace and responsibility could access it. And now Thrain wants to unlock its full potential." Vendra's hands clenched into fists. "He doesn't just want to control our empire, he wants to conquer others." Nathan stood close behind her, his presence steadying as she confronted the weight of this discovery. The temporary bond she had created between them had faded, but something deeper had taken its place. Something that made her crystal warm whenever they touched. "You could run," he said softly. "We could find somewhere far from here, somewhere they'd never find you. Without your blood, they can't activate the weapon." For a moment, she let herself imagine it. A life free from royal burden, exploring the cosmos with this remarkable human who had shown her what real love felt like. But the thought of her people suffering under Thrain's ambitions killed that dream before it could take root. "You know I can't," she replied, turning to face him. "But I can't give them what they want either. There has to be another way." Nathan's eyes lit up with the same expression he got when solving complex astronomical puzzles. "Maybe there is. You said the grid reads your genetic signature, right? What if we could use that connection to send a different kind of signal?" Working quickly, they began modifying the crystal's transmission protocols. Nathan's understanding of wave phenomena helped them identify frequencies that could penetrate Thrain's jamming fields. If they could broadcast the truth about his plans to every colony world simultaneously. A warning chime reminded them their hour was almost up. Vendra looked at their work with mixed hope and fear. Even if we expose him, he still has military control. My loyal forces are scattered, imprisoned, or in hiding. Then we'll find them. Nathan took her hands in his, and the crystal flared brightly between them. Your people aren't the only ones who can track energy signatures. Every observatory on Earth could be redirected to scan for Australian signals. We can create a network to help your allies coordinate. The basement lights flickered as a massive shape blocked out the stars visible through the window. Thrain's flagship had arrived, its hull crackling with barely contained power. The choice she had been dreading could no longer be postponed. Your time is up, Princess. Thrain's voice boomed through every speaker and screen in the house. What is your decision? Vendra squared her shoulders, every inch the royal heir despite her earth clothes and the tears threatening to fall. I need one thing before I surrender, she said, knowing the comm link would carry her words to the ship above. Let me say goodbye. She turned to Nathan, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. But beneath the sorrow, she saw understanding, and determination. He knew, as she did, that this wasn't really goodbye. Keep scanning the stars, she whispered, pressing her crystal into his hands. Its glow didn't fade at the transfer, another piece of proof that their theory was correct. Some frequencies only Earth's telescopes can detect. Find me, he replied simply, and kissed her. The crystal blazed like a supernova at the contact, transmitting the first part of their coded message through channels Thrain's forces wouldn't think to monitor. As energy coursed between them, Vendra felt Nathan's consciousness brush against hers one last time. In that touch was a promise, not of rescue, but of revolution. A transport beam enveloped her before their lips parted. The last thing she saw was Nathan holding her crystal, its light pulsing in time with both their heartbeats. As she materialized on Thrain's ship, surrounded by armed guards, Princess Vendra allowed herself a small smile. The ancient weapon's activation required royal blood freely given in the sacred chambers of Australia. And thanks to a human professor's brilliant mind and loving heart, her blood now carried traces of Earth's unconquerable spirit. Let Thrain take her home. The real battle was just beginning. The sacred chambers of the Australian palace gleamed with otherworldly light as Vendra stood before the ancient control matrix, her wrists bound in energy shackles. Thrain paced behind her, his footsteps echoing off crystalline walls that had witnessed 1,000 years of royal ceremonies. Now they would witness either his triumph or his downfall. The defense grid's power levels are critical, he announced, checking readings on a holographic display. Begin the activation sequence, Princess. Prove your worth to the new empire. Vendra kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart raced. 3 days had passed since her surrender. 3 days of waiting, watching, and sending carefully coded pulses of energy through her connection to the crystal Nathan still held on Earth. If their plan had worked, if he had succeeded in rallying her allies. The sequence requires a blood offering, she reminded Thrain. Freely given, as our laws demand. He smiled coldly. Of course. We respect traditions here. He released her shackles with a gesture. Proceed. Vendra approached the ancient altar, its surface swimming with colors no human eye could perceive. But as she placed her hand on the activation panel, she smiled inwardly at the thought that one human had seen these colors, however briefly, through their shared bond. The chamber's systems hummed to life, reading her genetic signature. But something was different. The alien traces in her blood, the remnants of Nathan's DNA from their connection, caused the readings to fluctuate. Just as they had planned. Something's wrong, Thrain snapped, stepping forward. What have you done? Before he could reach her, the chamber's crystals blazed with brilliant light. Hidden protocols, dormant for centuries, activated in response to the unique hybrid signature in her blood. The entire defense grid shifted frequency, broadcasting on channels that matched Earth's astronomical instruments perfectly. Across the galaxy, every observatory Nathan had contacted began receiving the truth about Thrain's coup, transmitted through the very network he had tried to weaponize. But more importantly, they began transmitting back. The chamber's displays exploded with thousands of signals, Australian ships appearing from hyperspace, led by vessels bearing the royal insignia. Ships that had been hiding, waiting for this moment, coordinating through Earth's telescope network that Thrain's forces had considered too primitive to monitor. "You didn't really think I came back just because you threatened me, did you?" Vendra's voice rang with authority as loyal guards stormed the chamber. "A true ruler protects her people through wisdom, not weapons. My ancestors understood that. So did the human who helped me remember it." Thrain lunged for the control matrix, but centuries of sacred technology responded to the royal blood that flowed through Vendra's veins, blood now forever marked by love for a world he had dismissed as worthless. Energy bands seized him as the palace defense systems recognized the true threat. "Your Highness." A familiar voice made her turn. Her father's most trusted general, Lysander, stood in the doorway with a contingent of royal guards. "The palace is secured. Your parents have been freed from the detention level." Tears of joy blurred Vendra's vision as she embraced her mother and father moments later. But even as she celebrated their reunion, her heart pulled her toward Earth, where she knew Nathan would be watching the skies, waiting for a signal. Hours later, after Thrain and his conspirators were imprisoned and the defense grid stabilized, Vendra stood in her private chambers preparing for the most important royal address of her life. The crystal hung once again at her throat, returned through diplomatic channels with a message that made her smile every time she remembered it: "Some things belong among the stars." She touched the crystal, activating the Universal Broadcast Network. Her image would appear on screens across two worlds, her own, and the planet that had taught her the true meaning of both love and leadership. "People of Australia, and honored friends of Earth," she began, her voice carrying to billions. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for our worlds. The isolation that bred fear and corruption ends now. Earth has proven itself not just ready for contact, but essential to the peace of our galaxy." She went on to announce sweeping changes: official diplomatic relations with Earth, sharing of beneficial technologies, and cultural exchange programs. But her final words were meant for one person in particular, watching from an observatory in a small college town. "The stars have always connected us, even when we didn't know it. Now they will bridge our worlds forever. And so, with the blessing of the Royal Council." She paused, her heart soaring. "I invite the one who helped save both our peoples to join me in marriage, uniting our worlds not just through diplomacy, but through love." The crystal pulsed warmly as she felt Nathan's answer through their lingering connection, carrying all the joy and certainty of the first moment their eyes had met on that starlit field. 1 month later. The royal wedding was unlike any either world had seen. Held in a massive crystal dome that offered views of both Australian constellations and Earth's familiar stars, it combined traditions from both cultures. Nathan stood tall in clothing that shifted between Earth formal wear and Australian royal garments, a subtle tribute to how Vendra had first appeared to him. As they exchanged vows, their words carried across space in multiple languages. But the love in their eyes needed no translation. The crystal that had brought them together glowed between them, its light reflecting off tears of joy in the audience, human and Australian alike. "The stars aligned perfectly," Nathan whispered as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. Vendra smiled against his lips. They had help. That night, 2 celebrations spanned the gulf between worlds. On Earth, humans danced and marveled at holographic displays of Australian wonders. In the royal palace, Australians learned Earth dances and customs, barriers breaking down with every shared laugh and story. And in a quiet moment, a princess who had crashed to Earth and the professor who had helped her soar again stood on a palace balcony, watching the double moonset. Their figures cast twin shadows, one shimmering with subtle alien iridescence, one purely human, but both parts of something greater than either world had imagined possible. "What do you see when you look at the stars now?" Nathan asked, holding her close. Vendra touched the crystal that had led her to this moment, its warmth matching the love in her heart. "Home," she replied simply. "In every direction." Above them, the defense grid pulsed with gentle light, no longer a weapon but a bridge between worlds. And in its glow, two hearts beat as one, proving that even in the infinite expanse of space, love could bridge any distance, unite any worlds, and write new stories in the very stars themselves.